The lights in the honeymoon suite were still on when the resort security finally forced the door open. A peaceful, luxury room just hours ago was now a battlefield. The bed frame was cracked. A lamp lay smashed beneath a trail of blood. Suitcases were ripped open like someone was desperate to find something or destroy something. And the new bride lay motionless on the cold marble floor, her skin bruised, her hair clinging to her face, her wedding band still shining on her finger. But the most disturbing part wasn't her body. It was the fact that her newlywed husband, the man who promised to protect her forever, had vanished into the night like smoke. And the very last thing he touched before disappearing was a single sheet of paper taped to the mirror, its edges still fluttering softly. No one knows who taped it there. No one knows when it appeared. But everyone who has seen what was written on it believes the same thing. It was the spark that set this entire nightmare on fire. Investigators later discovered something unsettling. This wasn't a sudden rage. This wasn't a random accident. This wasn't a simple argument. There were signs, violent signs, that the husband didn't just react, he spiraled. He tore through her luggage as if searching for something specific. He smashed personal items he had gifted her only days earlier. He punched a hole straight through the bathroom door. And then, sometime around 1:40 a.m., the screaming began. Hotel guests on both sides complained about a man shouting in disbelief, about furniture crashing, about a woman begging someone to calm down. But here's the detail that keeps investigators awake at night. The shouting stopped too suddenly. The silence came too quickly. And when security finally opened the door, the bride was gone, the husband was missing, and that mysterious document was staring right back at them, like a confession written by someone else. But what was on that paper? Who wanted the husband to see it? And why did they strike now, on the honeymoon of all times? If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight. The hallway cameras captured the husband pacing outside the honeymoon suite hours before the chaos began. He wasn't drunk, he wasn't smiling, and he wasn't behaving like a man enjoying the most expensive trip of his life. He kept rubbing his face, checking over his shoulder, walking in tight circles, like someone reliving something he had seen but couldn't accept. At 11:17 p.m., he re-entered the room. That was the last moment the bride was seen alive. Inside, the argument erupted so violently that guests 2 floors below heard the thud of something heavy hitting the ground. What they didn't know was that the husband had already found more than the single document taped to the mirror. He had uncovered her passport, older photographs, and medical records she kept folded deep beneath her clothes, evidence she thought she had hidden well enough to escape her past. The room showed clear signs of a discovery turning into destruction. Clothing was shredded, drawers yanked out, the mattress half off the bed as if flipped during the search. The bride's personal journal lay ripped apart, its pages scattered like confetti from a celebration gone wrong. Then came the moment investigators believe everything collapsed. The lamp shattered first. Then the closet door splintered. A shoe, bent and broken, lay in the middle of the floor, not from walking, but from being used to shield blows. Blood splattered the wall in a wide arc, tracing the bride's desperate crawl toward the bathroom. Her fingerprints were smeared across the glass door. She tried to lock herself inside. She tried to hide. She tried to breathe. But he forced it open. The impact left a dent where his shoulder collided with the frame. She must have fallen backward, striking her head against the corner of the tub. A faint trail showed where she attempted to pull herself upright, one last attempt to reach the phone on the sink. She never made it. The medical examiner later confirmed it. She endured multiple fractures, internal injuries, and blunt force trauma that no one could survive without immediate help. But help wasn't coming. Because while she lay collapsed in the bathroom, the husband didn't call the front desk. He didn't call for an ambulance. He didn't shout for assistance. He stood over her in silence for nearly 7 minutes. When he finally moved, it wasn't to help her, but to wipe his hands on a towel, grab the document from the mirror, and walk out of the room without looking back. He left the resort grounds through a maintenance exit meant for staff, disappearing into the dark shoreline that surrounded the property. By the time security opened the door to the suite, the ocean waves had swallowed the only footprints he left behind. But the story doesn't end with his escape, because outside the resort, as investigators later discovered, there was someone waiting, someone who knew he would run, someone who had been watching the couple long before they ever arrived, someone who didn't want the truth to stay hidden anymore. And this is where the story grows even darker, because his escape was only the beginning. The husband didn't run toward the road. He didn't try to find a taxi, or call a friend, or even head for the airport. He ran toward the shoreline, straight into the dense, moonlit trees that bordered the private resort. Security cameras lost him within seconds, but a separate camera, one the resort didn't install, caught everything. Someone else had been recording him. At 2:06 a.m., a figure stepped out from behind a row of palm trees, watching the husband stumble barefoot across the sand. This person never moved to help him, never tried to stop him, never called out his name. They just watched, silent, still, unseen. Investigators would later freeze the footage frame by frame. The shadow held a phone in their hand, held it up deliberately, as if documenting every second of the husband's breakdown, like they were waiting for this moment. Meanwhile, the husband made his way to a hidden service dock where small maintenance boats were tied up. He wasn't familiar with boats. He struggled with the ropes. He even dropped one into the water. But eventually, he climbed into a small engine-powered vessel and forced it away from the shore, disappearing into the Black Sea. The next morning, the boat washed up miles down the coast, empty, engine running, lights still on. No husband, no footprints, only his wedding jacket caught on a nail, torn through the sleeve. But here's where the story sharpens. Inside that jacket pocket, investigators found a phone. Not his phone, not hers. A third phone. A prepaid device. Wiped clean. Except for one thing. An unsent text message on the screen. Typed, but never delivered. I told you he would find out. The resort staff insisted they never saw anyone else with the couple. The bride's family claimed she never mentioned being followed, and the husband's relatives said he had no rivals, no stalkers, no enemies. But the message suggested something far more chilling. Someone orchestrated this. Someone leaked her secret to him. Someone wanted rage, wanted collapse, wanted destruction, and they had been close enough, watching closely enough, to document everything as it fell apart. Later, when detectives polled the resort guest list, they noticed a suspicious booking. A room reserved under a false name, paid in cash. A room with a direct view of the honeymoon suite. The lights in that room were always off, curtains always drawn. Do not disturb sign never removed. By the time police forced entry, the room was empty. No luggage, no clothes, no fingerprints. Only a faint scent of cologne in the air, and a small piece of torn paper left on the desk. From the same document taped to the mirror, the truth was clear. The husband didn't discover the secret by accident. He didn't lose control suddenly. He didn't fall apart on his own. Someone else set the stage. Someone else pulled the first thread. And someone else needed this marriage to end. Violently, publicly, irreversibly. But who? And why now? Those answers wait further down this story, because before the police could uncover the identity of the silent watcher, another discovery was made on the shoreline, one that took this tragedy from disturbing to truly horrifying.
By sunrise, the first responders combed the shoreline. The tide had shifted, revealing something no one expected. Among the scattered debris of the small boat, the husband's wallet floated face down in the sand. Inside, a credit card, a driver's license, a folded photograph, the kind a person keeps close when they think someone might try to erase their identity. But there was more, much more. A blood-stained scarf, unmistakably belonging to the bride, lay half-buried beneath a drift of seaweed. Its placement wasn't accidental. Someone had thrown it from the boat, almost as a warning, almost as a message. This is what happens when secrets surface. And there, tucked between rocks, was a small metallic USB drive. Investigators didn't plug it in immediately. They knew whatever it contained could destroy lives. Hours later, when the contents were examined, the files revealed messages, photos, and videos, not just from the bride and her husband, but of someone else, someone lurking behind every step they took, someone documenting months of their lives in secret. Every smile, every embrace, every whispered conversation. It was clear, this nightmare wasn't the result of one man's discovery alone. This had been orchestrated. By now, news crews had begun swarming the resort. Rumors spread like wildfire. Newlywed murder on private island. Secrets revealed. Tragedy on honeymoon. Who leaked the truth? And yet, the police were still missing the husband. He had vanished without a trace. But here's the chilling detail the press never reported immediately. The husband's car, left in the resort parking lot, contained traces of someone else's fingerprints. Someone had tampered with it before he returned from the shoreline. It was a calculated move, a final nudge in a chain of events that seemed to follow a script written by a hand unseen. By mid-afternoon, the story grew darker. Investigators discovered messages on the bride's phone, messages sent in the hours before her death. She had suspected someone was watching. She had warned the husband, but she hadn't expected him to react like this. And as the evidence mounted, one truth became undeniable. This wasn't just a murder. This was a carefully engineered collapse. A deadly revelation, a carefully guided chain reaction. A secret no one was meant to survive. The shore had revealed a piece of the puzzle, but many pieces were still missing. Who had orchestrated this? And why had the husband fallen so completely into their plan? The answers were hiding closer than anyone imagined, and the next night would bring discoveries that no one was ready for.
For nearly 24 hours, investigators pieced together everything inside the honeymoon suite. The broken furniture, the blood, the torn fabric, the shattered glass. But the most important piece didn't come from the room at all. It came from the bride's body. When the medical examiner completed the autopsy, they discovered faint marks on her wrist, thin lines, almost healed. The kind made not by violence, but by restraints. The kind used during medical procedures long before she ever met her husband. Evidence that her past had been hidden, deeply, deliberately, and dangerously. By the time her body was transported for forensic examination, the husband was still missing, presumed dead by some, hiding by others, hunted by whoever had been controlling the shadows. But inside the suite, one final discovery shook the investigation to its core. Behind the headboard, lodged in a narrow gap between the wall and the bed frame, police found a small voice recorder. Its blinking light was faint, almost dead, but it had captured something. Not the argument, not the fight, not the screams. It captured what happened before the violence erupted. Soft footsteps, a piece of paper being placed, a door gently closing, and then, minutes later, the bride's quiet gasp. She had found the document before the husband walked into the room. She knew the truth was out. She knew someone had exposed her, but she didn't know who. And her last recorded words were barely a whisper. Not now. Not like this. Moments later, the husband entered. Moments later, the confrontation began. Moments later, everything spiraled out of control. But the recorder captured one more thing. Faint, distant, chilling. A second pair of footsteps in the hallway. Someone standing outside their door, listening, waiting. The hidden orchestrator wasn't watching from afar anymore. They were close, too close. Detectives now understood the destruction inside that suite wasn't just the result of rage. It was guided, triggered, set in motion by a person who had followed them long before this honeymoon, long before the wedding, long before the bride ever revealed anything to the man she loved. The truth had roots, deep ones, roots buried in a life the husband knew nothing about, and a past the bride had spent years running from. And now, with the suite's final moments documented, the shoreline clues exposed, the watcher emerging from the shadows, and a marriage shattered by a secret planted at the worst possible moment, there was only one direction left to go. Back. Back to the day they first met. Back to the secret she carried. Back to the person who wanted their love destroyed. Back to the reason this honeymoon was doomed before the plane even took off. Because to understand why she died, and why he broke, and why someone else pulled the strings, we have to return to where it all truly began.
If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight. Long before the honeymoon suite turned into a crime scene, long before the secret document appeared on the mirror, long before the husband ever suspected anything was wrong, there was a young woman learning to live with the truth she wished she could bury. She had grown up quiet, withdrawn, careful, not because she lacked confidence, but because she learned early in life that people could be cruel. Her identity, the one she fought so hard to embrace, was something she guarded like a wound that never fully healed. Only a handful of people knew her history. Her doctor, her counselor, and one childhood friend. The only person who had seen her before her transition,
and the only person capable of weaponizing that knowledge. That friend, over time, became something darker. Jealous of her transformation, obsessed with her new life, bitter at the happiness she found. Every step she took forward made that shadow behind her burn with resentment. And when she met the man who would become her husband, that shadow surfaced again, unnoticed at first, but never far behind. Their meeting was simple, innocent. He was warm, charming, and saw her for who she was in the present, not the past she desperately hid. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She felt seen. She felt loved without hesitation. But love didn't erase fear. As their relationship deepened, she debated telling him the truth, not because she didn't trust him, but because she feared losing him. She had lost people before. She knew how fragile acceptance could be. So she told herself, one day, when the moment is right, I'll tell him. But the right moment never came, and secrets left unattended start to attract the wrong eyes. Her childhood friend, once trusted, saw the engagement online, saw the pictures, saw the happiness, and something inside them snapped. They began following her anonymously, creating fake accounts, watching her every move, collecting old records, old photos, old memories she wanted erased. By the time the wedding was announced, they knew everything: where she worked, where she lived, where the honeymoon would be. And they weren't watching because they cared. They were watching because they wanted to destroy her new life, piece by piece, starting with the man she loved. When the bride walked down the aisle, smiling with trembling joy, the silent watcher was already planning which moment would hurt the most. Not before the wedding, not at the ceremony, not even on the first night, but on the honeymoon, the one place where she should have felt safest, where betrayal would cut the deepest, where the truth would feel like a knife, where the perfect moment could be turned into catastrophe. That is where this entire tragedy truly began, with a secret she kept and a person from her past who refused to let her escape it. And now that we understand the beginning of her fear, we move next to the beginning of his. Because while she hid her truth, he hid something too. Something just as dangerous. Before the wedding night turned into a nightmare, before the screaming, the gunshots, the blood on the hotel carpet, there was a man who had already been living with fear long before he ever said, "I do." And now, as detectives tear apart the suite, as forensics photograph the bride's lifeless body, a different team begins the next step, tracing the groom's history. Not because they want to, but because his reaction, his panic, his rage didn't come from nowhere. It came from scars he had buried. They start with the basics: employment records, old addresses, family contacts. But almost immediately, something jumps out. Every employer he ever worked for, every apartment he ever rented, every emergency contact form, he always checked the same box: no living relatives. He never listed a single person. Not a mother, not a father, not even a sibling. He lived like a man alone, a man running from something. And then detectives discover a sealed juvenile case file. Court-ordered confidentiality, restricted access, locked tighter than anything a teenager should ever be connected to. But a warrant changes everything. The folder is pulled, the seal is broken, and inside, they find the first glimpse of the truth. At age 14, the groom wasn't just a child living in a quiet neighborhood. He was a survivor, a witness, a victim, someone who had gone through something so traumatic, so violent, that the court buried the entire case to protect him. But the report, those faded photographs,
those handwritten notes, those statements, reveal the one thing he never told his bride, never told his friends, not even told anyone. And suddenly, detectives begin to understand something crucial. He didn't snap on his wedding night because he saw something strange. He snapped because what he saw was something he had seen before. Something tied to his past. Something tied to that sealed case. Something capable of shattering a life twice. But the question now isn't what he saw. It's who put it in front of him and why it pushed him over the edge so quickly. Because the past he thought he escaped, the one he buried, the one the courts sealed, it didn't stay dead. Someone revived it, weaponized it, timed it perfectly to detonate on the night that was supposed to be the happiest of his life. And for the first time, investigators whisper a terrifying possibility. This wasn't a reaction. This wasn't panic. This wasn't chance. This was orchestrated. But who was behind it? Who knew the truth buried in that sealed file? And what did the groom see on his wedding night that dragged him violently back into the nightmare he spent decades trying to forget? To answer that, we must go back. Way back. To the beginning, before the wedding, before the secrets, before the blood. To the day everything first went wrong.
To understand the horror of the wedding night, to understand why a single look at his bride's face shattered him, you have to go back 19 years to a small, dimly lit house on the outskirts of Atlanta, where a boy learned that monsters don't always hide under the bed. Sometimes they live in the same house. The groom was 14, quiet, withdrawn, always keeping to himself. Teachers thought he was shy. Neighbors thought he was polite. But no one knew what he went home to. Because behind closed doors, a storm was building. The file detectives opened revealed the first clue, a report from a school counselor. A boy who showed up with bruises he couldn't explain. A boy who refused to change clothes in gym class. A boy who flinched when adults raised their voices.
There were hints, signs, warnings, but the truth didn't come out until the night police were called. And what they found that night is what the groom spent his entire adult life trying to outrun. Officers entered the home after a neighbor reported violent screams. When they kicked the door open, they found the boy huddled in a corner, shaking, bleeding, trapped. Standing over him was the person he trusted most. The person who should have protected him, the person whose face would haunt him forever. A face that would eventually be connected to the sealed file, a face he would spend years trying to forget. A face that, on his wedding night, he believed he saw again. Not literally, but in something his bride revealed. Something that echoed the past, something that resurrected the terror.
But there was another detail buried in that file, a detail detectives couldn't ignore. This wasn't just abuse. This wasn't just violence. This was part of something larger, something organized, something hidden. Because after that night, the boy wasn't just taken from the home. He was placed under protective custody. Protected from who? Protected from what? The answer was blurred, redacted, but it pointed to a truth investigators were now terrified to confront. Someone from that past event, someone dangerous, someone still out there, had resurfaced just in time to destroy his wedding, and they weren't done. But what exactly did his bride show him? What detail on her face, on the night she thought she was marrying the love of her life, triggered a buried memory so traumatic it sent him spiraling into madness? To uncover that, we must look deeper into the past, to the event that forced the boy into protective custody and connected his fate to the very person who would one day walk into his wedding with a plan already in motion.
Years passed. He became an adult who avoided deep relationships, someone who refused dating apps, someone who insisted on in-person introductions because he needed to see people, study them, make sure they were who they claimed to be. He carried a fear no one understood, a fear that the past could return behind a different face. And then he met her, the woman who would become his bride. Beautiful, kind, warm, understanding of his boundaries, patient with his fears. She was everything he thought was finally safe. But there was something he didn't know, something she hadn't told him, something she thought didn't matter anymore. Because she, too, had lived a life with a different identity. Not deceit, not malice, not hidden danger, just survival, just truth, just who she was. But to a man haunted by a shape-shifting past, even innocence could look like betrayal. Even safety could look like the monster he had spent 2 decades fleeing. And the sealed file hinted at one last chilling detail. A person in the boy's life who vanished right after the abuse case. Someone who fled the state. Someone who was never charged. Someone the detectives noted as potential return risk. Someone whose last known address was less than 2 miles from where the bride grew up. This was no coincidence. Someone from the past had moved close enough to influence the present. Whether the bride knew it or not, whether she meant it or not, her life had brushed against the groom's buried nightmare long before they ever said, "I do." And on that honeymoon night, when she revealed her truth, the truth she believed would bring them closer, he didn't see the woman he married. He saw the ghost that tried to end him. But who was the person who vanished? And what connection did they have to the woman he loved? When investigators dug into the sealed file, they found a single name scribbled on a faded page. The name of the person who disappeared right after the abuse case collapsed. A name the boy only ever whispered. A name he refused to write down. A name the state believed was an alias. Marlene Cross. A caretaker. A guardian. A woman who lived 2 lives. The gentle aunt neighbors adored. And the violent shadow the child feared. And the last trace of her, the final place she lived before vanishing into thin air, was a neighborhood the bride once called home. Detectives mapped it out. The groom's childhood home and the bride's old address sat on opposite sides of the same stretch of road. Not close enough for them to know each other, but close enough for their lives to brush dangerously close without either of them realizing it. And the bride, as a teenager, had once been cared for by an older woman in that neighborhood. Someone who babysat, someone who helped families, someone who came and went, someone who used different names in different houses. One of those names was Marlene. The bride never suspected that the kind woman who kept children after school had a past drenched in violence. She never knew that the gentle voice that helped her with homework was the same voice that screamed at a 14-year-old boy in a locked room years earlier.
She never knew that the person she'd known as Miss Lana was once investigated for abuse and walked free. She never knew her life had crossed paths with the groom's darkest nightmare. But the groom, buried under trauma and memory scars, recognized something. A detail on her bride's face. A subtle feature. A familiar shape. Something inherited not from the bride herself, but from the woman who raised her for a time. The same woman who destroyed him as a child. It wasn't that the bride revealed something malicious. She didn't betray him. She didn't deceive him. She simply shared her truth. A truth she had hidden for her own safety, her own identity, her own survival. She showed him a photo from her past, a moment from her childhood, a picture taken on the front porch, bright sunlight, young laughter, a girl who didn't know the world's cruelty yet. And beside her, smiling gently, hand on her shoulder, was Marlene Cross, the same woman the groom believed was finally gone forever, the same woman whose face haunted him, the same woman he thought he had escaped. That single photograph was the moment everything snapped. The groom didn't see the woman he loved. He didn't see the truth she wanted to share. He saw a trap, a circle closing in, a predator returning through the only person he ever truly opened his heart to. His bride didn't understand why he froze, why his eyes widened, why he stepped back like he was facing a loaded weapon. Her truth, innocent as it was, reignited a nightmare he had spent 20 years drowning. And in the center of that fear, one belief took hold. Someone had planted her in his life. Someone had brought her to him. Someone wanted him broken. But was he right, or was this the moment trauma finally tore reality apart? To find out, we have to enter the final stretch, where the truth becomes more dangerous than the lie he believed.
When the groom saw that childhood photo, something inside him fractured. Not a crack, a complete break. A separation between what was real and what felt real. Because in his mind, Marlene Cross wasn't just a memory, she was a living threat. A shadow that changed faces, a figure who slipped into new identities the way most people changed clothes. A woman who could hide behind innocence, behind kindness, behind anyone. Even, he believed, behind his bride. His hands shook uncontrollably. Breathing turned shallow. Vision tunneled. Voices in the hallway sounded like distant screams. This wasn't rage, not at first. It was recognition, or the illusion of it. Trauma pulling two timelines together until he couldn't separate the girl in the photograph from the monster in his past. And the bride, standing there confused, holding the picture she thought would bring them closer, became the reflection of the very person he feared. Not because she resembled Marlene, not because she acted like her, but because the groom believed he had finally been tracked down. And in his panicked mind, there was only one explanation. Marlene had found him, and she had used the bride to get close. The groom's past therapists had warned this could happen. Buried trauma, untreated flashbacks, identity-related triggers, it was a fuse waiting to burn. He had never told the bride about the full extent of what happened, never told her about the nightmares, never told her the name Marlene Cross. So she had no idea why, the moment she revealed her truth, his face changed,
why he backed away from her as if she were holding a weapon, why he muttered, "No, not again, not you. She sent you, didn't she?" She tried to reach out, tried to calm him, tried to explain, but the more she spoke, the more he heard the voice of his abuser echoing through her, words overlapping, past blending with present, a psychological avalanche 20 years in the making. He grabbed the photo, stared at Marlene's face, then looked at his bride. In that moment, he didn't see two people. He saw one. One threat. One monster. One face that had simply changed shape. The hotel walls felt like they were closing in. The lights flickered in his mind even though the room stayed bright. His heartbeat roared like a drum in his skull. And then, for the first time since childhood, he heard the voice. Not in the room, not through the bride, but inside his mind. A whisper. "You thought you could escape me. You thought I wouldn't find you. You thought I wouldn't change the rules." His panic turned into certainty. He believed the bride was Marlene. A new face, a new identity, a new disguise. And if he didn't act, he believed one thing: she would finish what she started decades ago. This was the moment when love became terror, when memory became delusion, when the groom's world finally collapsed in on itself. And what happened next, the violence, the chaos, the desperate attempt to escape, was the tragic consequence of a mind too shattered to tell truth from nightmare. But one question remains. Was the groom entirely wrong? Did someone from the past return? Or was this all trauma twisting an innocent truth? The answer begins to surface as the story rushes towards its final descent.
While the groom's unraveling played out inside the honeymoon suite, a psychological storm tearing his mind apart, something else was happening just a few floors below. A detail investigators almost missed, a detail that changes everything. At 10:47 p.m., minutes after the bride showed him the photo, hotel security recorded a woman walking through the lobby. Alone, unnoticed, familiar, too familiar. A blurred camera angle, a tilted hat, glasses, wig. But behind all of that, the bone structure, the gait, the mannerisms, detectives saw what the groom had spent years fearing. A face disturbingly similar to the one in the sealed file. A face they had only seen in a grainy photograph from 2 decades earlier. A face that should not have been there. Marlene Cross. The timestamp matched perfectly with the moment the groom broke down upstairs, almost as if the presence he felt wasn't just in his mind, almost as if the past really had followed him into the present. But here is the disturbing part. The woman didn't check in. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't request a room. She walked straight to the elevators, stood in front of them, and waited. Not for a ride, not for someone to meet her. It was as if she was listening, sensing, tracking something only she understood. Then, without warning, she turned around and walked back out into the night before anyone could approach. Gone, vanished, just like before. No credit card trail, no ID, no reservation. But she was there. The camera caught her. The investigators confirmed it. The groom wasn't entirely imagining the danger. And as detectives pieced this together, another disturbing fact surfaced. 3 months before the wedding, someone had accessed the bride's medical file, unauthorized, unlogged, hidden behind a string of proxy IPs leading back to an abandoned property in rural Georgia, a property connected to Marlene Cross. Someone had been watching, following, studying the bride and the groom, their meeting, their relationship, their engagement, their travel plans. Nothing about this couple was as random as it seemed. Their lives had been orbiting a silent threat long before they exchanged vows. This is where the tragedy gains a new shape. The groom's panic wasn't just trauma. It wasn't just memory. It wasn't just fear. There was a presence nearby, a figure from the past drifting just out of sight, not confronting him, not revealing herself, but circling, watching. And the bride, unknowingly holding a childhood photo of the very woman who had haunted his nightmares, became the trigger for a terror that was both imagined and sickeningly real. But the most unsettling discovery wasn't the footage. It wasn't the property. It wasn't the medical breach. It was what hotel staff saw hours after the groom fled the suite. In the long corridor outside the room, the same woman from the lobby was seen again. This time, closer, slower, moving with purpose. She walked all the way to the honeymoon suite door, the door still cracked open from the chaos inside. She stepped closer, tilted her head, listened, then turned and whispered something no microphone captured. Whatever it wasn't for the police. It wasn't for the staff. It wasn't for the bride. It was for him. As if she knew he would return. As if she knew this wasn't the end. And then, just like every other time in the past, she disappeared before anyone could stop her. So was the groom's breakdown pure hallucination? Or did trauma simply open a door to something that was already there? As the investigation deepens, one thing becomes clear. The past was not done with them. And the bride, the woman caught in the middle of this nightmare, had no idea that her childhood caretaker was the same predator who destroyed her husband's sanity. The truth is about to explode, and the real danger is only now stepping out of the dark.
When detectives realized the woman from the lobby and hallway matched the face in the sealed file, the investigation shifted from a tragic domestic case to a hunt for someone the state believed was impossible to track. Because according to federal archives, Marlene Cross wasn't just missing. She had been declared legally dead 12 years earlier. A death certificate, a closed case, a grave with her name on it. Yet there she was, walking calmly through a luxury resort, steps away from the couple she had once torn apart. This changed everything. The next discovery surfaced at 3:20 a.m., hours after forensics sealed the honeymoon suite. Hotel maintenance reported that someone had tampered with the floor's emergency stairwell door. Scratches on the metal, fresh impressions, a single fingerprint smeared on the railing. Partial match. Not to the groom, not to the bride. To a woman who, according to federal archives, had been buried for over a decade. The investigators now had to accept what they had been resisting for hours. Marlene Cross was alive, and she was circling the couple long before the honeymoon turned into a massacre. But why now? Why follow them? Why appear on the very night the bride revealed her truth? The answer came from a box the bride kept hidden in her luggage, a box detectives nearly overlooked. Inside were letters from that childhood caretaker she called Miss Lana, written in gentle handwriting, encouraging, motherly.
Harmless. Until the last envelope. A letter postmarked only 3 months earlier, well into the bride's adulthood. A letter she hadn't shown the groom. A letter she hadn't shown anyone. A letter she kept because she didn't understand why it made her feel unsettled. The message was short, barely a page, but its meaning cut through the investigation like a blade. Your life is about to change. Be ready for who you really are. I will come when the time is right. Signed, M. This was no coincidence, no random sighting, no ghost of memory. Marlene had inserted herself back into the bride's life exactly when the wedding was approaching, exactly when the groom's past was becoming harder to bury, exactly when the bride was preparing to reveal her truth to the man she loved. Marlene wasn't following one of them. She was following both of them. As investigators pieced this together, something else surfaced, a pattern in Marlene's past. Every few years, she reappeared under a new name, caring for a child, helping a family, disappearing again, moving like smoke, blending like fog, never staying long enough for anyone to ask questions. And in each place she lived, she left behind the same thing: children who struggled with identity, with who they were, who they weren't, and who they were allowed to become. Her influence was subtle, but corrosive, shaping, manipulating, guiding lives down paths they didn't choose for themselves. The groom escaped her, barely. The bride never realized she had been shaped by her. And now, 2 adults raised under the shadow of the same hidden hand had married each other, not by fate, not by accident, by quiet design. And the one woman who connected them, a woman who should not be alive, stood in the hallway of their hotel the same night everything collapsed, watching the room, listening through the cracked door, smiling. Not because she planned the violence, not because she wanted it, but because in her eyes, this was always where their paths would lead, 2 broken lives finally crashing into each other. The investigation had now shifted from understanding what the groom did to understanding what or who pushed him past the point of reason. And the answer seemed to circle one irreversible truth. The groom's mind collapsed when he believed his past had returned. But the past really was standing outside that door. It watched him break. It watched the bride fall. It watched the tragedy unfold like it had been waiting for this moment for years. And the most terrifying part? There was no record of where Marlene went after she walked away from that hallway. No camera caught her leaving the premises. No witness remembered seeing her outside. No taxi reported picking her up. She simply vanished. Again. So the groom wasn't just fighting trauma. He wasn't just battling memories. He wasn't just imagining danger. He was collapsing under the weight of a past that had quietly returned at the exact moment his guard was down. And now the investigators faced a truth more frightening than the crime itself. If Marlene is alive, she isn't done. Not with the bride, not with the groom, not with this story. Because the next person she reaches for is already in her shadow.
By sunrise, the case file had grown thick, but not with answers, only contradictions, only shadows wearing faces. Detectives knew one thing with certainty. If Marlene Cross had returned, she would not stop at watching. She never did. And the first real lead arrived at 7:12 a.m., when the bride's mother was brought in for questioning. She entered the room trembling, hands wrapped around themselves, eyes rimmed red, not just from grief, but from fear she couldn't name. When shown the still frame of Marlene walking through the hotel corridor, the mother didn't scream. She didn't faint. She didn't deny. She whispered one sentence that froze every investigator in the room. She promised me she would never come back. That confession cracked open a door no one expected. Because according to her, Marlene wasn't just a caretaker, not just a family friend, not just the groom's childhood torment or the bride's silent manipulator. She was something else entirely. The mother explained the truth she had buried decades earlier, the truth she thought was safe, because Marlene was dead. Marlene had been part of a quiet, unofficial program, a network of unlicensed caretakers placed in vulnerable communities, answering to no formal oversight, no background checks, no documented training, no accountability. They were supposed to nurture. Instead, they shaped lives to their own design. And Marlene, she was the most persuasive of them all. The mother's voice cracked as she confessed, "I let her raise my daughter. I trusted her. And when I tried to pull away, she told me I would regret it." The detectives pressed her for details. Why was Marlene declared dead? How did she disappear? Why was her grave real? The mother looked up, eyes hollow with memories she fought for years to forget. "She staged her death," she whispered. "She wanted freedom, a new identity, a new child to mold." This was no longer a domestic tragedy, no longer a jealous rage, no longer a moment of emotional collapse. This was a web, years wide, pushed into motion long before the groom pulled the trigger, and the bride, bloodied, broken, lying in a hospital bed after barely surviving, was the only living person who could answer the next question. Because hours before she lost consciousness, she said something the paramedics almost missed, something that didn't make sense at the time. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, she grabbed an EMT's sleeve with trembling fingers. Her voice was weak, cracking, fading. She said, "We were her last project." The EMT thought she meant the shooter's she, maybe a relative, maybe someone entirely. But now, in the bright, sterile light of morning, the meaning was unmistakable. The bride knew Marlene was alive. She knew Marlene had returned. And she knew the wedding triggered something Marlene had been waiting to complete. Detectives now faced a terrifying possibility. What if the massacre wasn't about the bride's confession? What if it wasn't about the groom's hidden past? What if the tragedy was only the result, not the cause, of a woman who had spent decades shaping them in opposite directions, only to push them into one final collision? Because if Marlene Cross was alive, if she had returned after 12 years in the grave, if she had walked those halls smiling, then this wasn't the end of her plan. It was the beginning. And the next move she makes will not be from the shadows. She has already chosen her next target.
Morning turned into afternoon. The resort emptied. The crime tape fluttered in the coastal wind, and somewhere beyond the perimeter, a woman who should have been dead was already moving on. But detectives still had one final thread left to pull: the groom. Not his actions, not his rage, not the moment he broke, but the last thing he said before he died on that hotel carpet. While bleeding out, he tried to speak. Officers thought he was asking for help, begging for air, calling his bride's name. He wasn't. His final words, caught faintly on a body cam microphone, were, "She told me she's coming for the child next." The officers assumed it was delirium, shock, a failing mind collapsing back into childhood nightmares. But now, after the bride's letter, the mother's confession, and the hallway footage, those words echoed with new clarity. He wasn't hallucinating. He was warning them. The detectives rushed to identify who the child might be. The couple had no children. The bride wasn't pregnant, no relatives nearby. Then the bride's mother broke down again, this time sobbing into her hands. Through shaking breaths, she revealed the truth. "There is a child," she whispered. "Not theirs, but hers." The bride had been mentoring a 12-year-old girl for months, a bright, shy kid she planned to adopt one day. A girl the bride often called the one person who makes me feel whole. A girl the bride had introduced to Marlene years ago, unknowingly. A girl who resembled the bride at that age far too closely. And suddenly, the groom's final words were no longer the ramblings of a dying man. They were prophecy. Because when detectives arrived at the child's home to place her under protection, she was gone. Her backpack missing, shoes missing, her bedroom window unlatched from the outside. And the only sign of movement was a single folded note placed gently on her pillow. The handwriting was the same delicate script from the bride's hidden letters. The message was short, just 4 words. "It's her turn now." At that moment, the investigation transformed into something darker than a homicide case. This wasn't revenge, not jealousy, not coincidence, not madness. It was a cycle, carefully constructed, quietly curated, passed from life to life like a twisted inheritance only one woman controlled. A woman who changed names as easily as seasons. A woman who wrote letters to shape identities like clay in her hands. A woman the state declared dead because it was easier than trying to stop her. Marlene Cross, alive, unbound, unfinished. The bride survived the shooting, but she wakes up in a hospital room surrounded by officers, not to mourn her husband, but to answer one question. What did Marlene want with her, and what does she want with the girl she took? Across the state, an Amber Alert blares. Patrol cars sweep highways, air units scan the woods, but the detectives know the truth. They won't find Marlene. They never do. She surfaces only when she chooses, and disappears when the story shifts to its next chapter. The honeymoon tragedy was never the ending. It was only the opening act of a woman rewriting lives from the shadows. And now, with a new child in her hands, her story has begun again. If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories and see justice exposed, subscribe to Crime Vaults as we bring light to the darkest true crime cases and never miss the secrets hidden in plain sight.